Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe and turn on notifications. Samuel Croft was a man of patterns. He believed the universe, at its core, was a series of logical, predictable systems. History, his field of study at Crestwood University, was not a chaotic jumble of events, but a grand equation of cause and effect. His life was built upon this principle. He woke at 6:30 every morning, drank his black coffee while reviewing lecture notes on the fall of the Roman Empire, and left for campus promptly at 7:45. His world was a fortress, built of routine, and for a long time, he believed his marriage was its strongest wall. His wife, Olivia Reed, was 34 years old, 2 years his junior. For 8 years, she had been the one variable he thought he had successfully integrated into his equation. She was an emergency room nurse at Crestwood General, a profession that was the antithesis of his own. Her life was governed by chaos. The scream of sirens, the frantic rhythm of a heart monitor, the unpredictable tide of human suffering. In the beginning, he had admired her for it. He saw her as a bastion of strength, a woman who could walk through storms of pain and exhaustion, and remain standing. Their life together was a negotiated peace between his order and her chaos. They met in the quiet hours between their disparate worlds. Late dinners, where she would recount the night's tragedies in a low, tired voice. Brief, exhausted conversations before sleep. Weekends that served as a sanctuary to rebuild the connection their schedules constantly eroded. But systems, as Samuel knew from history, are prone to entropy. The decay began quietly, not with a bang, but with a series of small, almost imperceptible shifts in the pattern. It was a hairline crack in the foundation, the kind you ignore until the entire structure groans under the strain. He first noticed it in her schedule. Olivia started leaving for work earlier, long before her afternoon shift was due to begin. When he inquired, her answers were plausible enough. Catching up on charting, she'd say, or, there's a staff meeting I can't miss. Then came the return journeys. The 20-minute drive from the hospital would stretch to an hour, sometimes more. The reasons were always ready, delivered with a practiced weariness. Heavy traffic, a critical patient arriving at shift change, a colleague needing help. Samuel, a man who dealt in facts and evidence, had no counter-argument. He simply noted the inconsistency. The data points began to accumulate. A new perfume, a light floral scent he didn't recognize. It appeared on certain weekdays, but never on the weekends they spent together at home. It was a scent, he decided, not meant for their house. It was a scent for someone else, for somewhere else. And then, there was the phone. For years, her phone had lived on the kitchen counter, face up and open to the world. Now, it was a silent, guarded object, always placed screen down on the table beside her, like a small, dark secret, lying in plain sight. Occasionally, it would light up from beneath. A brief, muted glow for a few seconds, before she would swiftly pick it up, her thumb swiping across the screen to silence it, before placing it back down, once again, shielded from view. The gesture was so quick, so reflexive, that to question it would seem paranoid. He tried to question it once. "Expecting a call?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral as he stirred their pasta sauce. "No, just work," she'd replied, not looking up from her magazine. The new charge nurse is a nightmare with scheduling. Always last-minute changes. Her answers about her day grew vaguer. The detailed stories of patients and hospital drama were replaced with generic summaries. Tearing. Busy. The usual. It felt as if she were reading from a script. The emotional depth of her experiences edited out, leaving only the bland, sterile headlines. Samuel told himself it was the pressure of her job. The burnout rate for ER nurses was notoriously high. He was a rational man, he needed a rational explanation. He tried to fit these new variables into his existing equation of their marriage. Stress. Fatigue. Professional demands. He repeated these words to himself in the quiet of his study, surrounded by books filled with the logical progressions of history. But the unease grew. A cold, persistent feeling that defied logic. It was a dissonance he couldn't resolve. a variable that didn't fit. And Samuel Croft, though a man who revered logic, could also be impulsive when a system broke down. He wasn't the type to let a problem fester, to gather doubts for months and build slow, elaborate theories. When an equation didn't balance, he needed to find the error. And he needed to find it quickly. The stability of his fortress depended on it. The rational man within him was at war with the insecure husband. He began a quiet investigation, framing it in his mind not as suspicion, but as data collection. A historian gathers facts before drawing a conclusion, he reasoned. It was a methodical, academic pursuit. He started with the car's odometer. He'd make a mental note of the mileage when she left, and check it again when she returned. Some days, the numbers aligned perfectly with a round trip to Crestwood General. On other days, there were unaccounted for miles. 10 here, 15 there. Small discrepancies, easily explained away. An errand for a colleague. A stop at the pharmacy. A different route home to avoid traffic. Olivia always had a reason when he casually brought it up. Her explanations were smooth, logical, and left him feeling like the one who was irrational. His search for evidence escalated. He started checking their joint credit card statements online, scanning for transactions that didn't fit the established pattern. A coffee shop on the other side of town. A lunch charge from a restaurant she'd never mentioned. Each discovery was a small jolt. Another piece of data that corrupted the integrity of his model. He'd construct elaborate, innocent scenarios in his head to explain them away. But the effort was becoming exhausting. The fortress of his certainty was being dismantled, brick by brick. The phone remained the epicenter of his anxiety. That small, dark rectangle held a world he was no longer privy to. He never touched it. That was a line he wouldn't cross. A violation of the established protocols of their marriage. But he watched it. He watched the way she angled her body away from him when she texted. The way her expression would change. A flicker of a smile. A slight furrow of her brow. At a message only she could see. One evening, as she was getting ready for a shift, he saw her smiling at her screen. "Good news from work?" he asked. His voice a carefully calibrated instrument of casual interest. She looked up, startled, the smile vanishing. "Oh, just a silly meme a coworker sent. You wouldn't get it. Hospital humor." She locked the phone and slid it into her pocket. The conversation was over. It was then that he remembered the app. Months ago, after a series of late-night incidents were reported in the hospital parking garage, Olivia had expressed her anxiety about driving home alone after a grueling 16-hour shift. "What if my car breaks down? What if someone follows me?" she had asked. Her voice genuinely laced with fear. The solution had been practical. A technological fix for a modern problem. They enabled location sharing on their phones. "It's for safety," she had insisted. "So you can see that I've made it to the hospital okay, and that I'm on my way home." It had seemed sensible. He had activated the feature for her, shown her how it worked, and then largely forgotten about it. He had no reason to check it. He trusted her. Trust was the foundational assumption upon which their entire system was built. Now, the memory of the app returned. Not as a tool for safety, but as a temptation. The icon sat on his phone's home screen, innocuous and benign. Yet it felt to him like a key to a locked room. A room he was terrified to enter, but desperate to see inside. For days, he resisted. Opening it would be an admission of failure. It would mean that he, Samuel Croft, the man of logic and reason, had succumbed to base, unfounded jealousy. It would mean he no longer trusted his wife. He would lie in bed at night, Olivia breathing softly beside him, and stare at the ceiling, his mind racing. He constructed arguments and counter-arguments. He was betraying her privacy. No. She had agreed to it for her own safety. He was being paranoid. No. The data suggested a clear pattern of anomalous behavior. The internal debate was consuming him. His lectures became rote. His focus fractured. He found himself staring out his office window, not thinking about the Peloponnesian War, but about where Olivia was. At that exact moment. Was she really in the hospital cafeteria? Or was she at that coffee shop across town? The obsession was a fever. And the app was the only potential cure. He needed a definitive data point. A piece of evidence so conclusive it would either confirm his worst fears or shatter them, allowing him to return to the comfort of his ordered world. He needed an answer. He needed to balance the equation. And the little blue icon on his phone screen pulsed with a quiet, malevolent promise. The promise of truth. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening. The air in the house was thick with unspoken tension. Samuel was in the kitchen, methodically chopping vegetables for a dinner he had little appetite for. The rhythmic knock of the knife against the cutting board was a familiar comfort. A small piece of order in the encroaching chaos. Olivia came downstairs, already dressed in her scrubs. She tossed her bag onto a chair, the sound making him flinch. "Hey," she announced to the room, her gaze fixed somewhere over his shoulder. "I have to work an extra shift tonight. They're critically short-staffed in the ICU and asked for volunteers. I won't be back until morning." Samuel paused, knife in hand. He didn't turn around. Every part of him screamed that this was a lie. The delivery was too rushed. The explanation too neat. He analyzed her words, her tone, her posture, searching for the tell. It was in the lack of eye contact. It was in the slight tremor in her voice that she tried to cover with a cough. "All right," he said, his own voice unnaturally calm. He forced himself to continue chopping. "Be careful on the drive." "I will." She came up behind him, hesitated, then placed a quick, cold kiss on his cheek. It felt like the brush of a stranger. A second later, the front door clicked shut. He stood motionless for a full minute, the knife still in his hand, staring at the closed door. This was it. The anomaly. The event that would either validate his hypothesis or prove it false. He put the knife down, his hands trembling slightly. He wiped them on a dish towel, walked into the living room, and sank onto the sofa. The house was silent, but his mind was roaring. He tried to reason with himself. Hospitals were often short-staffed. Extra shifts were common. He was overreacting. But the feeling, that cold certainty in his gut, wouldn't subside. He picked up his phone. His thumb hovered over the location app icon. This was the Rubicon. Once he crossed it, there was no going back. He took a deep breath, the air feeling thin and sharp in his lungs, and tapped the screen. The app opened. A map of Crestwood City. He searched for her name. A moment of loading. And then it appeared. A single blue dot, blinking softly. His eyes scanned the map, moving instantly to the familiar location of Crestwood General downtown. But the dot wasn't there. He zoomed out, then back in, his heart beginning to pound against his ribs. A frantic, trapped bird. The blue dot was stationary. It was miles away from the hospital, nestled in a quiet residential area, in the city's East End. He pinched the screen to zoom in further, his breath catching in his throat. The address materialized in clean, digital text. Number 884, Vesper Lane. He stared at the address. Vesper Lane. A neighborhood of spacious, two-story homes and manicured lawns. A place far from the noise and urgency of any medical facility. His mind scrambled for a logical explanation. A GPS glitch. A network error. Maybe she had stopped to help someone on the way. A patient's house, perhaps? A home visit? But she was an ER nurse. They didn't do home visits. And even if she had, why lie? Why say she was at the hospital? The questions circled, venomous and unanswerable. He spent the next hour pacing the living room, checking the phone every 5 minutes. The blue dot didn't move. It was fixed, a tiny, digital anchor holding his wife in a place she was not supposed to be. He abandoned the idea of dinner. Hunger had been replaced by a hollow, nauseous dread. He went upstairs and lay down in their bed, in the dark, staring at the ceiling. The phone lay on the nightstand beside him. Its screen, a portal to his own personal hell. At 11 o'clock, he checked again. Still there, unmoving. At midnight, the dot remained, a silent, blinking accusation in the darkness of his room. At 2 in the morning, after a period of fitful, nightmarish sleep, he woke with a jolt and grabbed the phone. Still there. At 4, as the first hints of dawn threatened the horizon, it was in the exact same place. Sleep was impossible now. He just lay there, the phone clutched in his hand, feeling the initial shock and anguish curdle into something colder, harder. Anger. A pure, clarifying rage began to swell inside him. A pressure building behind his eyes. She wasn't just cheating. She was lying. She was systematically, deliberately deceiving him. Assuming he was too predictable, too trusting, too stupid to ever find out. She had underestimated him. That was the deepest wound of all. At 6 o'clock in the morning, as the gray sky began to bleed with the colors of sunrise, his phone buzzed. A message from Olivia. Leaving the hospital now. Exhausting night. Be home in about 30 minutes. Love you. He read the message 3 times. The words, hospital, exhausting, love you, seemed to mock him, each one a calculated falsehood. His hands were steady as he opened the location app one last time. The blue dot was still sitting placidly on Vesper Lane. She hadn't left. She wasn't at the hospital. She was composing a lie. From another man's bed. His rage had cooled overnight, solidifying into a block of ice in his chest. He felt a strange, chilling clarity. He knew exactly what he had to do. He considered his reply, weighing various options. Accusations. Questions. Threats. In the end, he chose precision. A surgeon's cut. No room for ambiguity. No space for more lies. That's great, he typed, his thumbs moving with deliberate calm. But did the hospital move? Because your phone spent the entire night at 847 Vesper Lane. He hit send. And stared at the screen. The message status changed to read, almost instantly. Then, nothing. Minutes stretched into an eternity. He imagined her panic. The frantic whispers. The desperate scramble to invent a new lie that could possibly explain the inexplicable. But no reply came. Her silence was the confession he needed. He got out of bed. The exhaustion of a sleepless night replaced by a surge of adrenaline. He pulled on the first clothes he could find, a pair of jeans, a dark sweater. He didn't shower. He didn't make coffee. He grabbed his car keys from the bowl by the door. And walked out into the cool morning air. He didn't hesitate. He didn't wait for an explanation he knew would be another lie. He needed to see it. He was a historian. He needed primary source verification. He drove through Crestwood's waking streets, the rising sun casting long shadows across the asphalt. The city felt alien. A place he no longer recognized. 20 minutes later, he turned onto Vesper Lane. He slowed the car as he approached the address, his heart a heavy, rhythmic drum against his ribs. Number 847. It was a handsome 2-story house with a wide porch and a meticulously kept lawn. There was a dark sedan parked in the driveway, a model he didn't recognize. And next to it, parked on the street, like a silent, damning confession, was Olivia's silver hatchback. He parked across the street, turned off the engine, and just sat for a moment, gathering himself. This was the point of no return. Ringing that doorbell would detonate his entire life. The routines, the patterns, the carefully constructed fortress. All of it would be reduced to rubble. But running away was no longer an option. He got out of the car. The street was quiet, the only sound the chirping of birds in the trees. He crossed the street, his footsteps echoing in the silence, and walked up the stone path to the front door. He took one deep, steadying breath, and pressed the doorbell. He heard movement inside. The sound of footsteps, then the click of a lock being undone. The door swung open. A man stood there. He was about 40, with gray streaks at his temples and a tired but handsome face. He wore a light blue medical coat, a hospital ID badge clipped to the pocket. He looked at Samuel with a confused, wary expression. "Can I help you?" the man asked, his voice polite. Samuel didn't answer immediately. He just stared, his mind cataloging the details like a machine. The coat, the badge, the address. The equation was solving itself. In a voice that sounded unnervingly steady to his own ears, he asked, "Are you Dr. Corbin from the hospital?" The man's eyes widened in surprise. "Yeah, who are you?" Before Samuel could answer, a familiar voice called from inside the house. "Miles, who is it?" Olivia appeared behind him. She was wearing an oversized t-shirt that was clearly not hers. The logo of some university stretched across her chest. She was barefoot, her hair messy and loose around her shoulders. Her eyes found Samuel's, and she froze. In an instant, all the color drained from her face. She looked like a ghost. Samuel didn't yell. He didn't make a scene. He just stood there, looking from her to the man she was standing behind. A tableau of cheap, domestic betrayal. So the night shift was here, he said. His calmness edged with a razor-sharp sarcasm. Olivia took a stumbling step forward, her hand reaching out for him. Samuel, wait. I can explain. But he was already turning away. There was nothing to explain. The data was conclusive. The sight of them together was the final, irrefutable proof. She had spent the night with her coworker, lied to his face, and assumed he would never find out. He walked back to his car, the sound of her desperate cries following him. Samuel, please. Come back. We need to talk. He got in, started the engine, and drove away without looking back. In the rearview mirror, he caught a fleeting image of her standing in the middle of the street, her hands clasped to her head, the man Miles trying to pull her back inside. Samuel felt nothing. No pity, no doubt. Only a cold, devastating clarity. The marriage was over. The system had failed. It was time to build a new one. When Samuel arrived home, the house felt both cavernous and suffocating. The air was stale with 8 years of shared history, now poisoned by the events of the last 12 hours. He locked the front door, went straight upstairs to their bedroom, and began to pack Olivia's things. His movements were methodical, efficient, devoid of emotion. It was not the act of a grieving husband, but of a technician decommissioning a failed project. He pulled suitcases from the top of the closet and began to fill them. Clothes, shoes, toiletries, books. Everything went in with an almost mechanical precision. Each item he touched felt alien, an artifact from a life that was no longer his. He didn't cry. He didn't smash anything. He simply executed the task, his mind a quiet, orderly space. As he was sorting through the papers on her nightstand, he found his phone and dialed a number. It was a divorce lawyer a university colleague had recommended months prior during a casual conversation. At the time, Samuel had thought it strange to even save the contact. Now, he was grateful for his foresight. He explained the situation to the lawyer in a flat, dispassionate voice. The lie about the shift, the location app, the address on Vesper Lane, the confrontation. The lawyer listened in silence, then spoke with firm professionalism. You did the right thing, Mr. Croft. We'll start the process today. Do not engage with her. Samuel hung up, took a deep breath, and continued packing. When he had filled every suitcase and box he could find, he carried them, one by one, down to the garage and stacked them neatly against the wall. He returned to the living room and sat on the sofa. The house, though still physically full of their shared belongings, felt utterly empty for the first time. It was an emotional void. As if love, trust, and partnership had been surgically removed. Around 10 that morning, Olivia arrived. He heard her key in the lock. The frantic rush as she pushed the door open. She stopped short when she saw him sitting there, arms crossed, staring at her with a blank expression. Her eyes were red and swollen, her face pale and streaked with tears. Samuel, we need to talk. Please, she began, her voice cracking. He didn't move. He simply pointed a finger toward the garage. Your things are in there. You have until the end of the day to get them out. Her face crumpled. No, don't do this. I know I messed up, I was stupid, but we can fix this, we can go to therapy. We can. Therapy? He cut her off, a bitter, humorless smile touching his lips. You think therapy fixes this, Olivia? You spent the night with another man. Texted me a lie about being at the hospital. And assumed I was too dull to ever figure it out. You didn't just disrespect our marriage. You underestimated my intelligence. That, to me, is unforgivable. She tried to approach him, her hands outstretched in a plea. But he held up a hand, a gesture that stopped her in her tracks. Don't come near me. You lost that right on Vesper Lane. She sank to her knees on the floor, her body shaking with loud, ragged sobs. I was confused. I felt so alone. You're never here, you're always in your head, thinking about your books and your history. He laughed. A short, sharp sound with no warmth in it. So the answer was to cheat? To lie to my face and spend the night with a coworker? You could have talked to me. You could have said you were unhappy. But you chose the set. You chose the easy way out. And now you expect me to believe you're sorry? I swear I am. I love you, Samuel. She gasped between sobs. He shook his head slowly. He picked up her car keys from the small table beside him and tossed them onto the floor near her. You don't love me. You love the security I provided. You love the idea of a stable home to return to while you do whatever you want. But I am not that person anymore. Take your things. And get out of my house. He stood up. Walked past her sobbing form without a second glance. Went upstairs, and locked himself in his study. He could hear her downstairs. The sounds of her gathering her things. The scrape of boxes being dragged across the floor. Her intermittent crease. An hour later, he heard the front door close for the final time. A strange sense of relief washed over him. It was a painful, agonizing relief. But it was freedom. In the days that followed, he blocked her number. Had the locks changed. And froze their joint bank accounts. The story, however, did not end there. News traveled fast. Andrew, the co-worker Dr. Miles Corbin, was married. His wife, through a mutual friend who had seen Olivia leaving their house that fateful morning, found out about the affair. Humiliated and furious, she exposed the entire sordid mess to the hospital administration. Complete with text messages and statements. An internal investigation was launched. Dr. Corbin was suspended for conduct inconsistent with the institution's ethical standards. Weeks later, he was quietly fired. Lauren, too, felt the full weight of the consequences. The whispers followed her down the hallways. Colleagues who once respected her now looked at her with a mixture of pity and contempt. She was ostracized. A ghost in her own workplace. When her department announced a restructuring, she was among the first to be reassigned to an undesirable position. A polite, corporate way of forcing her out. Months later, she resigned. Samuel heard all of this through the grapevine. Snippets of information from friends who thought he'd want to know. He listened to each update with a distant, academic interest. As if hearing about the fates of historical figures in a book. It was simply the logical outcome of their actions. Cause and effect. Samuel moved forward with the same efficiency with which he had dismantled his marriage. He sold the house on Vesper Lane. He couldn't look at its walls without remembering the lies they had contained. He moved into a smaller, modern apartment downtown that was practical and minimalist. He threw himself into his work, took on new research projects, and began socializing with friends he had neglected for years. The sharp, acute pain of betrayal gradually faded, replaced by a sense of lightness. It was as if by shedding his marriage, he had also shed a heavy weight he hadn't realized he was carrying. Life, as it always does, went on. He never asked about Olivia. He never sought out information. To him, she had simply ceased to exist. One Saturday afternoon, months later, he was at a grocery store, pushing his cart down an aisle. And then he saw her. She was standing in the cleaning supplies aisle, staring blankly at the rows of detergents, as if the choice were an insurmountable problem. She was thinner. There were dark circles under her eyes. Her hair was pulled back in a careless ponytail. The vibrant energy she once possessed was gone, replaced by a fragile, worn-out look. She looked smaller, as if life had stripped away the layers of confidence she once wore so effortlessly. She didn't see him at first. Samuel's initial instinct was to turn his cart and retreat down another aisle, to avoid the encounter altogether. But then he stopped. He realized, with a sudden clarity, that he didn't need to run. He felt no anger. He felt no pain. He felt nothing at all. And in that hollow space, he recognized his victory. Her eyes finally drifted in his direction, and she froze. Her own eyes widened, her breath catching audibly. She abandoned her cart and took a hesitant step toward him. Samuel. He stopped his cart and looked at her, his expression calm and neutral. He gave a simple nod. Olivia. A shaky, forced smile touched her lips. How are you? Good. He replied. The word was plain. Direct. Unadorned. And you? She swallowed hard, her gaze dropping to the floor. I'm surviving. He nodded again, saying nothing more. The silence between them was immense, filled with the ghosts of unspoken apologies and unhealed wounds. She looked like she wanted to say more. To try one last time to reopen a door that had long since been locked, bolted, and sealed. But he gave her no opening. His placid demeanor was an impenetrable wall. Take care of yourself, Olivia, he said finally. It was not a wish, but a dismissal. He pushed his cart forward, past her, without looking back. He thought he heard her whisper something, maybe a faint, "You too," but he wasn't sure. And it didn't matter. As he walked away, leaving her standing alone in the aisle, he felt the last vestiges of their shared life fall away. He had moved on. His new life, the one he had built from the rubble of the old, had no room for the past. Olivia stood watching him go, the crushing weight of everything she had lost. The husband who had loved her. The home they had built. The stable life she had thrown away, settling upon her, all for a series of selfish choices that had seemed harmless at the time. Samuel left the store, loaded his groceries into his car, and drove home. Back in his apartment, he put everything away, each item in its designated place. He sat on his sofa and looked around. The space was simple, but it was his. Every object had been chosen by him. Every decision was his alone. And for the first time in a very long time, he felt whole. Not because he had found someone new, but because he had found himself again. A man who lived by a clear, unassailable logic. He had learned a fundamental lesson. One that was now etched into his very being. Trust is a finite resource. Once it is depleted, it cannot be replenished. No apology, no therapy, no second chance can restore it. All that remains is the unfiltered, objective truth of the betrayal. The greatest triumph, he concluded, wasn't revenge. It was the ability to stand up, walk forward, and never again allow someone to underestimate you. And so, while Olivia bore the heavy, unending weight of her choices, Samuel Croft walked free, light, unburdened, at peace. He had learned that the greatest act of self-preservation is knowing when it's time to walk away. And he had walked away, at exactly the right moment. The equation was finally balanced. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next.